Of a good story must be in want of an audience, and lo, what do I have here? And so as the shades of evening fall over this beautiful village in the dark peak, come with me for some tales of horror and dread, such as are unrivaled in the annals of Derbyshire life. If you've ever read Derbyshire Life, you'll know what I mean. Now, we will introduce you tonight to true tales of old Hathersage, as true as I am riding this unicycle. Follow me to the first venue for our evening's dire entertainment.
Dire? Can get me.
Now, as the story goes, could I just mention that heckling will result in the heckler being visited with the most dreadful consequences.
I'll do some heckling, Dave.
Go on, Dave, heckle.
You eat them, them
Heckle's cakes.
The heckle cake is a delicacy. No. The tale is told of a young lady of these parts by the name of Mary. Now, Mary's family lived in this house up here. And Mary was young and rich and beautiful and self-willed and utterly determined that she would never marry nor be any man's chattel. She was, of course, much courted by the young blades of London town, where her family had a large dwelling. But she spurned them all. Her parents were, of course, in despair, fearing that they would never marry her off. Until one year in the early part of the 18th century, one summer they returned to their country house and a young man appeared on the scene. A new young gentleman whom nobody had seen before. He was beautiful, elegant, and tall, with the body of a thoroughbred. A head of flaming red hair. It went down his back in a long ponytail with a white tip on the end. Now Mary had no interest in the usual young men, but this young man was different. Like her, he too was thoughtful. He too loved to ride across the hills of Derbyshire. He too loved poetry and dancing. Oh, dancing. He danced like an angel. He danced like a demon. And as they were dancing, Mary blushed. And the onlookers knew that a wedding would indeed be in prospect. And so it transpired. The wedding day was set. All was prepared. The only thing still disturbing Mary a little was that Mr. Fox, for this was the gentleman's name, had not yet introduced her to the house where she was to be mistress. No, my dear, he said, let that be a wonderful surprise for your wedding night. But Mary was young and rich and beautiful and self-willed, and this rankled greatly, until the night before the wedding. She went to her bed, she composed herself for sleep, and she found herself dreaming, a strange dream, for in this dream she rose from her bed. In this dream she donned her riding habit, walked down to the stables, took out her favourite horse, and rode across the moonlit hills to Mr. Fox's house. Now, she arrived at the gate to Mr. Fox's land, where there was a magnificent gateway. Magnificent, isn't it? And over it was the fox coat of arms, and beneath it was inscribed in large golden letters, "Be bold." And being young and rich and beautiful and self-willed, she thought, yes, I shall be bold. Through she went, up the carriage drive, to the very front of the house, where she was to be mistress. And there, on the front of the house, was a great portico. And inscribed above it was the fox coat of arms. And beneath it, in letters of gold, it said, "Be bold, be bold." And Mary, being young and rich and beautiful and self-willed, thought, damn straight. She went to the door. She hammered on the door. But there was no answer. And being bold, she turned the handle and walked through, and found herself in a dim chamber, a great hall, scarcely lit by the many candles that burned there, scarcely lit by the low guttering fire in the magnificent ancestral fireplace in the great hall, above which was carved the fox coat of arms, and in letters of gold, "Be bold, be bold,
Be bold.
but not too bold." And Mary, being young and rich and self-willed and very beautiful, thought, I shall be as bold as I choose, and went deeper into the house, down a long, dark corridor. At the far end, scarcely gleaming a little palely in the moonlight, was a great oak door. And above this great oak door was carved the fox coat of arms, and in golden letters, "Be bold, but not too bold, lest that your heart's blood should run cold." But Mary, being young and rich and beautiful and self-willed, said to herself, "Stuff that." And in she went, and found herself in a great chamber. And in this chamber were hanging many drapes of white from the ceiling, or cast over the backs of chairs, or bundled on window ledges. As her eyes began to accustom themselves to the moonlight, her foot caught on something. She bent down and picked it up. It was the most beautiful lady's dancing shoe in white leather. At this moment she heard footsteps coming down the hall. she saw a faint glowing light coming down the corridor. She knew that her lover, Mr. Fox, had returned. She turned to greet him. In doing so, she knocked against one of the drapes hanging from the ceiling. It slowly turned towards her. It was a woman. It was a dead woman hanging from the rafters by her hair. She looked about her, all about her, corpses in their wedding dresses, thrown over chairs, bundled in window ledges, or hanging from the ceiling. She knew she was in mortal danger. She must hide, but where to hide? Behind the door. Barely in time, Mr. Fox now strode in purposefully, looked about him, chose one of the corpses, and began trying to pull the wedding ring from its finger. To no avail. It was firmly stuck. It would not move. In a fury, he drew out his sword to strike off the finger, but caught the wrist instead, and the hand itself flew across the room into the dark shadows. He looked for it for a few moments, but finally went to a different corpse, took the ring off its finger, and left. Mary waited a few moments to be sure, and then fled the house, out through the chamber, through the hall, through the doorway, down the carriage drive, through the beautiful gateway to her horse, and thence across the moonlit hills of Derbyshire, back to her father's house. And the next day came, and it was, of course, her wedding day. What was she to do? What was she to do? What could she imagine doing in this situation? Ladies and gentlemen, she did what any of you would have done. She married Mr. Fox. And all the wedding breakfast, the feasting, the rejoicing, the wine, the food, the friends, the love, the joy, until, when all was happiness and contentment, Mary stood up and said, "My dear friends, last night I had the most peculiar dream." And she told them of the dream in which she rose from her bed and rode across the hills to Mr. Fox's unknown house. She told them of the gateway and the doorway. And Mr. Fox, smiling, said, "Oh, but my dear, it is not so." And she told them of the dark hall and the fireplace and the moonlit corridor. And Mr. Fox, smiling a little less, said, "My dear, it is not so, nor was it so." And she told them of the chamber and the drapes and the corpses of his brides and the hand lost in the room. And Mr. Fox, now ashen-faced, said, "But my dear, it is not so, nor was it so, nor God forbid it should be so." And Mary reached into, where else? Her handbag. And forth she drew the bloody hand with the ring still on it, and cried, "But it is so, and it was so, and here the hand I have to show." The wedding guests, in horror, ran forward and dragged Mr. Fox away and cut him into several large, messy pieces. My poor Mary, so newly wed, so newly widowed, and now she lives in Fox House. She reads, as was her wont. She rides, as was her wont, and if she wishes, she may dance. And if any of her friends say to her, "But my dear, how can you bear to live in a house of such terror?" she replies, "Oh, but you mustn't believe everything you hear about dreams." For she is young, and she is rich.